The number one reason your solos sound nothing like the jazz creates is that you're only focusing on what notes to play, not how to actually play them. So in this video, I'm going to show you 3 techniques that I've used to help hundreds of my students turn uninspired lines into solos that feel like real jazz so that you can sound like the artists that you love. Here's a C major 7 phrase. It's correct, but it still sounds too much like an exercise. And now listen to the same idea after I've added just 3 phrasing moves: a grace note, a triplet, and a trill. If you can play a C major 7 arpeggio, you can do this. Let me show you exactly where to add grace notes, triplets, and trills to fix your playing. If your jazz blues solos sound like you're just running patterns, you're missing this: grace notes into chord tones. A quick slide or hammer on into the target note. Watch what happens to this playing lick when I add those grace notes to the 3rd and the 5th. Now check out how it instantly gets some of that West style phrasing. Same notes, different feel. So that's the sound. I'm starting with a grace note in front of the G, so F sharp into G, repeating the G, then down to the F, and another grace note before the E, the 3rd of the chord. That's really a part of the jazz blues sound. Now a grace note is so quick that it doesn't really get its own rhythm. It's just like a very fast pickup into the real note. Here's the simple recipe for using them. So you just pick a chord tone. So I'm really just starting with a C major triad here. And then you're adding grace notes a half step away. So most of the time that's going to be below. So for instance, I have the F sharp under the G, and then I'm just sliding into that. Check out this phrase where I slide into the 3rd of C. This is a super common jazz blues sound that you can use pretty much everywhere. But you can also add a grace note sliding into the 7th, and notice the bluesy tritone interval at the end of this one. Besides slides, hammer-ons can also be a great way to execute these fast grace notes. Practice this by taking a triad and come up with lines where you are adding grace notes to the chord tones. You'll quickly start to hear it. Now let's move on to 2 kinds of triplets that instantly makes your lines feel more like jazz, without learning any new notes. Let's start with turning arpeggios into triplets. This is a great way to boost the energy of your solos. You go from this plain C major 7 arpeggio to this, and I also add a grace note to the top note B, which works so great for this. So I'm turning the C major 7 arpeggio into a triplet, but I'm also adding a leading note before it. And that grace note, because that sounds really good. This is an easy way to get some instant bebop. And this works with all arpeggios. Here I'm using an E minor 7 arpeggio over C major 7. If you want to check out these licks and techniques away from the video, then grab the PDF. There's a download link in the video description. Now start making your own lines with triplet arpeggios. It's instant jazz, but if you want that real bebop sound with the notes that sound wrong for a second and then sound amazing, then check out these chromatic triplets. Now let's level it up with chromatic triplets. Here's the rule. We're aiming for a chord tone, and in this case we're actually just landing on the root C. Check this out. Notice how you first get the chromatic triplet to C, and then it continues up the arpeggio. This also sounds great targeting the 5th, so here I'm starting on F sharp, and it's at the end of the phrase. Because we started with jazz blues, here's the same chromatic triplet idea in a C7 jazz blues phrase, and listen for where it lands and how it works with the grace notes to give it that jazz blues flavor. Okay, so grace notes made the line speak, and triplets add energy and motion, and that's where trills come in. Done the right way, they're a fast way to make one note sound exciting, so your solo doesn't sound like a non-stop 8th note run. Let me show you a simple way to use them without tensing up. A trill is just a quick back and forth between 2 notes, so here I use it as an embellishment on the 1st note of the phrase. Without the trill, you have this. And check out the same line with a trill on the 1st note. On guitar, the easiest way to do this is a short hammer-on pull-off burst, like this. The trick is picking notes where you can trill to the notes right above. Same position and string, no weird stretches. Now, Schofield once said in an interview, most guitarists waste a lot of time trying to learn all variations of everything. And this is definitely one of those moments. Don't learn 20 trills where 18 of them are unplayable. Learn 2 that you can use right away and spend your time making music. So here's the C major scale that I'm using. Anywhere you see 2 notes a step apart and on the same string, that's a trill spot. And another great spot is trilling on this B on the high E string. And you can use this to get a classic bebop sound. Here's a phrase that borrows from Donna Lee. Now you've heard this on one chord, but you needed to work over chord progressions as well. So let's use the same ideas over a 2-5-1, and then I'm gonna show you how to sneak in a little jazz blues flavor that works outside the blues. Let's start with a basic 2-5-1 line, and then we'll just upgrade it with phrasing step by step. So here's the basic lick. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's just a bit boring. So first I'm gonna add a couple of grace notes, one on G7 and one on C major 7. Especially the grace note before the high B and C major 7 is nice. Check it out. Now let's add some triplets. A chromatic triplet on D minor 7, really at the beginning of the bar, and an arpeggio triplet on C major 7. Now it's kind of beginning to sound good, and this gives the line that forward motion. So you have the chromatic triplet at the beginning of the D minor 7 line, then the grace note on G7, and then the arpeggio triplet on the C major 7. For adding trills, there are 2 spots. You can use the G7, but by changing the G7 line just a little bit, you can also add one at the beginning of the C major 7 bar. To keep it simple, let's use the one on the G7. Now let me show you how to use a blues sound on C major 7. It's a note choice that can sound wrong for a second until you resolve it, and then it sounds amazing. Here's blues phrase number 1 on C major 7. Listen for the blues sound. It's really about those grace note slides and also one blue note that I'm using. And of course you also want to pay attention to how it resolves back into the C major 7. I changed the G7 line just a bit because then it's easier to get that first part of the blues phrase to stand out. With that slide into the 3rd, that's really the sweet spot for a blues sound. Now second, I'm using the flat 7, B flat. And of course, that is really quite dissonant against the major 7, but it is also just that bluesy bite, and I resolve it quite quickly back into the chord down to the E. Again with a grace note into the 3rd. Now here's a more dissonant version, same concept, but I kind of hang on that B flat a little bit longer, so it adds a bit more blues friction before resolving it to the 5th. Now you've got 3 simple ways to make your lines sound more like jazz. Grace notes, triplets and trills. And the same keep it simple concept applies to chords. Instead of memorizing 1,000 hard grips, Joe Pass used a flexible system that you can move around the neck. Now in this video I break down that method and show you the few chords that he built everything on, so you can come confidently and build a solid foundation. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.